Rudy's Revelation.
This is all a conspiracy. No, you know that? It's a conspiracy there.
Google me, bitch! Google me!
Hey everybody, welcome to the podcast. It is Friday. Happy Friday. June 28th. Wow. Joe Biden is toast. As I predicted for the presidential debate, the first presidential debate, the earliest presidential debate in history, it looks like the Democrats threw old Joe Biden under the bus. And it did seem a little bit orchestrated, an orchestrated plan due to the scheduling. A very, very early debate, which gives them time to replace Joe Biden. Will it be 25th Amendment? Will Kamala Harris take over for the next few months? What is going to happen now? So it obviously wasn't a cheap fake. So I'm going to be going over the poor debate performance of Joe Biden, particularly. Not going to talk too much about Trump. He did as expected. And of course, more headlines. There are a couple other things going on as well. So let's get into the headlines for this Friday, June 28th. All right, the first headline up is this is an opinion piece from the New York Post. We just witnessed the end of Joe Biden's presidency. And this is from the Post editorial board. I'm not going to really get into the opinion piece, but I'm going to get into some headlines here. There are a few from the Wall Street Journal, which isn't surprising, but all over the media, even in left-wing media, there are calls, or surprisingly calls, for Joe Biden to step down. It wasn't cheap fakes. This is what we on the right have been calling or talking about for years now. It's got progressively worse over the past year. They can't even hide it anymore. And so they started calling it a cheap fake. But now, as expected, it's out in the open. Was it purposeful? Did they shove him out there without a teleprompter, without notes, knowing he would fail? It looked like he had an earpiece in. He kept touching his ear and looking out, like touching his ear like I don't hear anything. And then they told him, don't touch your ear. And he kind of like pretended to scratch or whatever. He did that a couple times. So I think he did have an earpiece in, but it didn't really help him. So going back to the headlines here, Wall Street Journal, Biden crashes in first clash with Trump, and other takeaways from the debate. The president appears unsteady while Trump mostly keeps up his composure. More from the Wall Street Journal, Biden's disastrous night stands to alter the course of the election. The Democrat needed to quell concerns about his fitness for office. Instead, as usual, he exacerbated them, allowing Trump to command the room. Again, from the Wall Street Journal, Democrats privately discuss replacing Biden on presidential ticket. Halting debate performance spurs turmoil in the party over 2024 candidate. And then we're going to go on to the AP in just a second, who very similar headline, surprisingly, from the AP, but some of the most left-wing media, or not even left-wing, the establishment media, go on to say that Biden did terribly, but Trump was lying. So they're still covering their tracks and trying to hit Biden. But we're going to go back to the headlines here. My podcast, the episodes have been getting very long. They're going to an hour now. So I'm going to try to cut it back down to size, try to make it 30 minutes, 30 to 40 minutes or so. I don't want to get past that because it's hard to hold people as well as when I cut it down to an audio podcast. I like the 40-minute or so format. So going on to the AP here, their headline is Halting Biden Tries to Confront Trump at Debate but Sparks Democrat Anxiety About His Candidacy. Now, the article goes on to say, a raspy and sometimes halting, President Joe Biden tried repeatedly to confront Donald Trump in their first debate ahead of the November election. And I'll skip, of course, what they said about Trump. Biden's uneven performance, particularly early in the debate, and I just got to say here, when he walked out on stage and said, "Hello, folks," you know, and he waved to two people like he was waving to a crowd, and his uneven gait, immediately I said, holy shit, the Democrats threw Joe Biden under the bus, because it was apparent that he did not have the verve, the vigor that he did for the State of the Union. And immediately I'm like, uh-oh. And then when he started speaking, you could, the low, raspy voice, like he just got up from a nap, was apparent, was very disturbing. So going back to the story here, Biden's uneven performance, particularly early in the debate, crystallized the concerns of many Americans that the 81, he is too old to serve as president. It sparked a fresh round of calls for the Democrat to consider stepping aside as the party's nominee, as members of the party fear return of Trump to the White House. As I predicted, did they throw him under the bus? Is this all an orchestrated plan to kind of get somebody else onto the ticket? Will he step down? Is there a battle between Biden himself or the people around Biden to try to push him over the finish line? Are there fears of Kamala Harris taking over or wanting to front the ticket? What exactly is going to happen? I think there's a plan there, and this is just part of putting that plan into action. Newsweek has a headline, China mocks U.S. presidential debate, very entertaining. The article from Newsweek goes on to say Chinese commentators mocked the first presidential debate between President Joe Biden and Donald Trump, pointing out the president's repeated verbal stumbles and the questions over the truthfulness of his rival. Here, I don't think the Chinese care about whether Trump is truthful or not. And this is, again, this is Newsweek, so it's establishment media. Newsweek is now the CIA. But they're constantly pivoting to, yeah, Biden was awful, but Trump is still a liar, and he's the organizer of January 6th and all this nonsense. But they're not sticking now. The biggest point for us, for those who, whether you support Trump or not, but whether if you're keyed into how the establishment works and what exactly goes on in global politics, is that a lot of people watch this. So what this is it's going to be a watershed moment for the electorate. People will now see that bobblehead Karine Jean-Pierre was lying the whole time. It's not cheap fakes. And they have been sheltering Biden and the truth about Biden, his age, his dementia, etc., for some time. So even if they switch candidates, they are not going to be able to wash away the painting of the Democrats as lying about somebody who obviously had dementia and not being truthful of his cognitive ability and his failures. So I'm going to go back to the Newsweek article here. Biden was widely seen as the loser of the debate. And this is from Newsweek, with his voice sounding hoarse and sometimes appearing to go off track in his remarks. His performance was criticized by both Republicans and Democrats in America at a time that he has been fighting questions over his age. Personal attacks, hazy memory, mocking each other. This debate was very entertaining for many Chinese people, wrote high-profile media commentator and former state media editor Hu Zijin, on X, where he has more than 560,000 followers, despite it being banned for most people in China. We're going to go off the other headlines here. This is the New York Times. U.S. allies watched the debate with shaking heads and a question, what now? Across Asia and Europe, there was little talk about winning and more concern about American stability, both domestically and on crucial foreign policy issues. Obviously, the problem is why is this a wake-up call for people? Were people living under a rock? Did they not believe the right-wing media or alternative media when they said, or even Sean Hannity for that matter, saying Joe Biden is a stumbling, mumbling, bumbling mess, which he has been for some time. Now, there's been a marked decline from 2020. Let's just make that clear. Over the past year, it's been a marked decline. Over the past 6 months, a marked decline. Over the past month or so, 6 weeks, a really steep decline where they could barely even put this guy in public without him really acting like a dementia patient. The lead from the New York Times here is during Thursday night's debate, President Biden told former President Donald Trump the United States is the envy of the world. After watching their performance, many of America's friends might beg to differ. Indeed. The problem is, and in the debate, if you didn't see the debate, I'm not going to play clips here, that Donald Trump said America is a mess. The Joe Biden presidency ruined America. He's destroying America. And if he's given another term, he will certainly destroy America. America will never come back from another Biden term. Trump should have said, which Trump a lot of times is a little naive about how things go on. As I predicted, they might throw Joe Biden under the bus, 25th Amendment him, or use it as a reason to bring somebody else into a ticket. Either he might voluntarily step aside, what have you, to bring in another ticket. How are you going to sidestep Kamala Harris? That's another issue. But Trump should have said, not Biden is ruining the country, the Democrats are ruining the country. That would have been the smartest. If he had any, forethought, Trump should have said the Democrats are ruining the country. And so that would have been a blanket statement, even if Joe Biden is replaced on the ticket, that the Democrats are ruining the country, Democratic policies, open border, spending. And the problem is with the accounting of who raised the debt, and they added Trump's tax cuts to the debt, which that's not really how the accounting works. They took out COVID spending. Joe Biden, the Democrats' policies, because especially when you deficit spend without the need, which there wasn't, they're just throwing money at people and to their donors' constituents, that you're going to add inflation. You could see the inflation under Trump was still very low. As soon as Biden took office, and particularly when he passed his first bill, the inflation started to tick up and then got wildly out of control. Going back to this article, though, Sergei Radchenko, a historian at Johns Hopkins, said, I am worried about the image projected to the outside world. He continued, it is not an image of leadership. It is an image of terminal decline, without a doubt. And matter of fact, this guy's comments are echoing exactly what Donald Trump said on the debate stage. He goes, they're laughing at us. And he's been saying that for some time. And all of a sudden now, in the New York Times, they're starting to say this. The problem is there are people that are awake, that can read between the lines and see exactly what's happening. Read beyond the propaganda and the nudging and all the mischaracterizations and all this stuff. Look past the lies and see what's happening. And the problem is when the facade of lies begins to crumble and the plausible deniability also falls away, all of a sudden there's a turning. Oh, we don't want to be seen as propping up a lie anymore. But people don't have a memory that lasts more than 10 seconds. You have to understand is all the mainstream media, whether it's Mediaite or the New York Times, they always were propping up Biden and shaking their fist at Trump. People should start listening not just to right-wing media or conservative media, but alternative media that's saying, okay, Trump isn't the be-all to end-all, but he's certainly better. And America First policy and economic isolationist policy is really the way to go, because you have to put Americans first, because after all, it is a republic. All right, going back to the headlines, Mediaite looks and sounds ancient. Biden's appearance roasted minutes into the CNN debate with Trump. Chris Cillizza, I guess I don't know this guy, but he tweets, he posted on X, look, the debate was a total and complete disaster for Biden. He looked old. His answer trailed off repeatedly. He was hard to understand. He would stop in mid-sentence and move on to something else. I never thought he would be this bad. Stunning, truly. That's without a doubt. As I predicted, mind you, that this was probably going to be the case. First of all, no life preservers, no notes, no coaching from people in the audience's staff and whatnot, no teleprompter. Everybody could see that without a teleprompter, he couldn't function. It seemed like he had an earpiece in, but even with that, it wasn't working. He had no notes. At a certain time, he seemed to be reading, but not writing. You could tell when someone's writing. And he kept flipping through the pages, and they weren't supposed to have notes. Did he have notes? He could only have note paper. Now, was the note paper provided by the staff? Did it have invisible writing on it or something? I don't know. He seemed to be reading. It's hard to know. But it was a unmitigated disaster for sure. Back to the AP, they actually changed their headline. A halting Biden tries to confront Trump at debate, but sparks Democratic anxiety about his candidacy. And we went through this before. A raspy and sometimes halting Joe Biden tried repeatedly to confront Donald Trump in their first debate as his Republican rival, Trump, countered Biden's criticism by leaning into falsehoods about the economy. Really, the problem is with AP and establishment media, as I constantly say, you can't call things falsehoods unless you buttress your claims with evidence. He didn't get into evidence. They didn't get into evidence of the story. They listed things Trump said, and they said he was lying about it, but they didn't say anything. Biden's uneven performance, particularly early in the debate, crystallized the concerns of many that 81, and I already read this, it sparked a fresh round of calls for the Democrat to consider stepping aside as the party's nominee as members of his party, and I read this before as well. It's the headline, the starking headline from earlier to now. Back to the New York Times, though. 6 takeaways from the first presidential debate. In a testy personal clash, President Biden failed to ease worries about his age. Which is kind of like the funniest thing, because there were worries about his age. If anybody was looking closely, because people don't read the news, they don't watch the news, and they certainly don't watch conservative media, which show all the halting, and they have collages of Biden's faulty speaking and halting speaking. And so it's as Donald Trump forcefully made his case with wild claims of exaggerations again, and the moderators held to their fact-checking fire. Perhaps. President Biden has struggled through the first debate, New York Times goes on to say, of the 2024 campaign against Donald Trump, meandering and mumbling, stumbling and bumbling, like Sean Hannity says, through answers as the former president pressed his case for a second term with limited resistance from his rival. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think so. It's just strange. But I want to get to at least some of the takeaways right now from the New York Times. The debate exposed Biden's biggest weakness. Mr. Biden's allies desperately hope he could turn this into commanding performance to calm voters' persistent concerns about his age. Dream died within minutes. Harassed me, Mr. Biden grasped to recall some specifics and labored to articulate. They should have ended there. The statistics he could remember in one early answer confused trillionaires with billionaires. Sometimes he lost his train of thought terribly. If you watch the debate, when he was the first to speak, he went into this speedy diatribe, which was like, oh, and at first I'm like, okay, he's back on the Adderall. And I think it was, he tried to remember, and this was probably what all the week of coaching was trying to get him just to rehearse his opening statement. And he zipped through it like a 10-year-old, giving their first oral presentation, like reading it from a paper. He was going so fast. And Trump looked over at him and was like, what? And a couple times when they did the split screen, and we're going to get to that in just a second, Trump looks over and was like, Trump didn't make faces, but the faces he did made were hysterical. Going back to what I was just talking about, the split screen damaged Biden. Mr. Biden's struggles were just apparent when he was speaking. For long intervals, he stood silent, eyes darting, mouth agape. Even at some point, my wife was looking at the screen going, "Close your mouth, you idiot." Back to the article. CNN split screen of both candidates shown throughout the debate offered little reprieve for a president who kept trying to clear his throat in the early going. Mr. Trump, in contrast, grinned attentively and waited for his chance to attack. Without a doubt. It was, listening to my wife, it was pretty funny. I didn't need to get on Twitter or to follow anybody. All I had to do is listen to my wife comment about Joe Biden. Scratching his ear, his mouth agape. He seemed to be staring out at nobody. There was no one in the audience. It was like he looked like someone helped me. That was his expression the whole debate. But I'm sure most of you watched it. Getting back to the headlines. So the propaganda continued with NBC. Biden-Trump 2024 debate highlights Biden stumbles as Trump fires off falsehoods. So again, they're balancing. Biden did terribly, we agree, but Trump's a liar. Actually, Biden was the liar. Not only did he lie about the losers, the military service people being suckers and losers, that was a lie. And also, I don't know if he wasn't coached on this, but he went ahead with they're fine people on both sides, which was just debunked a day earlier by Snopes. I was hoping that Trump would say Snopes, but he didn't say Snopes. But he finally, in his second rebuttal on the fine people on both sides, he did say debunked. Because his first comment, he said he didn't get it out. He said, that's not right. Nobody, that's fake news, or I forget what he said, but he didn't say debunked. And it took Snopes 7 years, mind you, but eventually they debunked it, and they just published that a day before the debate. But Biden went there anyway, and even Trump said that you said that was the reason you ran, and he did say that in Stephen Colbert, and Trump and Biden denied that. So there were more falsehoods, definitely, on Biden, especially when they went to golf handicap, and Biden said he was a 6, and then Trump said, you're not a 6 handicap, and then Biden said an 8, and Trump said, you're not an 8 either, I seen your swing. Very funny. The subhead NBC says, President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump faced off in the first debate. It was the first time they met since 2020. Mediaite. David Axelrod tells GOP strategists, if Biden's replaced, you guys are in trouble. And I just want to go on to say, I'm trying to get this in 30 minutes here. I might might go over a little bit, is that we're not in trouble. Like I said, this lays bare the fact that the Democrats have always been lying about Biden. What does that mean about the party? The Democrats cheated in the 2020 election also, but also in the 2016 election and the lead up to 2020, but particularly the lead up in the Democratic primaries to 2016. Don't forget, the Democrats cheated the voters, the primary voters, to shut Bernie Sanders out of the nomination. That's very disturbing. Now they lied. What is Binder going to say, Karine Jean-Pierre? What is she going to say during today's briefing? How is she going to defend this? There's no way. Is this another cheap fake? I hope Peter Doocy says that. Is this another cheap fake, this debate performance? Come on. So David Axelrod tells GOP strategists, if Biden's replaced, you guys are in trouble. Because David Axelrod and the Obama umbrella faction that is really running the Democratic Party, Obama is still the head of the Democratic Party, mind you. Hillary Clinton's in there somewhere. But they've already, this is part, with David Axelrod's comments, this is part of a plan. Was it a contingency, or is it an orchestrated plan to, you pretend you give Biden the Adderall, you don't, give him something else, a placebo, and he goes out there and he thinks, they might have given him a little boost of something that wore off within a minute. Who knows? But it very well could have been the main strategy to sideline Biden, because Biden doesn't want to go. Moving on to other headlines, and they are other headlines today besides the debate. Newsweek reports MAGA turns on Amy Coney Barrett. Trump made a mistake. We all know Trump didn't make a mistake during her confirmation. Many people, including myself, pointed out that because of her fervent Catholicism, that she's an authoritarian, and her authoritarian bend might trump the Constitution, which proves to be the case. She's more of authoritarian and she's kind of a traitor to the movement. So Trump did make a mistake, but after Gorsuch, there wasn't many to go to. You have Gorsuch, you have Alito, you have Clarence Thomas. To find people that are following the Scalia playbook, the real originalist playbook that Scalia outlined, that's why he was murdered, would be hard to find. So they went to that other guy, and then they went to this woman, which were all supported by Mitch McConnell, mind you. So going back to the article, this is the lead. Supporters of President Donald Trump are turning against U.S. Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett after she sided with the Biden administration in a dispute with the Republican-led states. In a 6-3 ruling in Murphy versus Missouri, Barrett wrote for the court that the states did not have a standing, and this is the standing issue again, which you need to understand what standing is, and it's fairly new precedent type issue that they standing to sue over social media companies moderate content on their platforms. Justice Samuel Alito filed a dissent and was joined by Clarence Thomas and Neil Gorsuch, of course. And this thing about standing is arguable. In any case, I'm not going to belabor that, but it's not the fact that to sue over how social media companies moderate their content. That's not the point. The point is the federal government was advising social media companies on how they moderate content. That's the point. So she didn't even articulate the point correctly. All right, more news. New York Times, Israel readies troops for potential escalation in Lebanon. Israel officials toured the northern border as U.S. officials stressed the need for diplomatic solution to tensions with the military group. If you know what's going on here, Hezbollah is a militant group that pretty much runs Lebanon. There is a Lebanese government, and Lebanon used to be really the Europe of the Middle East. It's where Christians and Muslims and others, Alawites, lived in harmony for a long time. And then Iran, through Syria, there became a lot of political turmoil. There was a civil war. I don't want to get into history. But Hezbollah, so Lebanon is pretty much a client state of Iran now. Now, if Israel goes to war with Hezbollah, that will be a proxy war with Iran. It's not the same with Hamas. Hamas are Sunni, and although they're getting support from Iran, it's not the same as Hezbollah, which is pretty much Iranian, for lack of a better word. They're Shia militia. Moving on to other headlines. From NBC News, the U.S. readies to evacuate Americans from Lebanon if fighting between Israel and Hezbollah intensifies. U.S. officials are increasingly concerned that Israel is going to carry out airstrikes and a possible ground offensive in Lebanon in the coming weeks. This spells one step closer to World War III. What we don't need is another Arab-Israeli war in the Middle East. At the same time, we're trying to poke the bear in Ukraine, where Russia is a nuclear power and they're threatening. And in Biden, during the debate, he kept saying that Russia wants to attack Europe, wants to go into NATO countries and reestablish the Soviet Union. There is no evidence that Putin wants to do this. And I don't think Putin wants to do this. He never said it to fellow Russians. And it's not just Putin. You know, there is a Russian government and a Russian military. And why would Russia want to attack NATO countries knowing they'd get a full military response from the United States and Europe together? It would be suicide for Russia. Russia would never do that. It's absurd, to say the least. That's just a false claim. Russia, as they said, and this is what they did, stated publicly, they want a buffer zone against NATO expansion. So if NATO is considering having Ukraine join, which would mean NATO intelligence and military operations would go right up to the border of Russia, including along the Black Sea and near Crimea, that would be a security issue for Russia. So they wanted to establish a buffer zone in the Donbass and in that area to protect Crimea, which protects their Black Sea fleet. It's a security concern. I don't want to belabor this anymore, but I just wanted to say that in fact is the case. The Russians never intended to take Kiev. They did it as a feint. And if they were able to make it to Kiev, they would have, but they didn't. They went halfway and stopped. That's called a feint, if you know anything about military strategy. Okay, going on to other news. Daily Express U.S. CDC issues, dengue fever alert in U.S. as hundreds of cases confirmed in Florida. Florida has the most reported cases in the continental U.S., with most of those cases in Miami-Dade. But we went over this article before. Most of the cases of dengue were brought from other countries. But there is some natural spread in Florida, but they're trying to hype up fear of disease before another possible outbreak in the United States of some sort of, to create some sort of pandemic to get people worried, because Bill Gates and others are going to come out with a new shot. And so it's just a way to scare people back into the vaccination line. Oh my God, if this goes on YouTube, are they going to give me a strike for that? Come on. All right, I think this is the last story here. I think we're at 40 minutes. A ballooning U.S. budget's deficit is killing the American dream. Well, why is that? And I'll tell you right now. Going into the story. The government deficit problem is creating an income problem for Americans. Listen to this. Economists warn. Last week, the Congressional Budget Office, CBO, raised its estimate for government deficit this year by a whopping 27%, or $408 billion, over its February forecast of $1.9 trillion. Paying for that debt can divert money away from private investment, which in May turned to dampen wage growth. The exploding debt could cause as much as 10% reduction in wage in the income within 30 years. Not surprising at all. I've been telling people this. The debt service is close to $1 trillion. Of course, it takes money away from private investment. But is that federal investment in the private sector? $1 trillion could buy a lot per year, even for social services. But people don't understand that. That's the problem with with deficit spending and rising debt. It's not just inflation, although that's bad enough. It's a hidden tax, up to 30% on everybody. But it affects the poorest people the most. You know, the rich people absorb it. And if rich people have a lot of debt, that helps them because your debt is still at pre-inflation levels. It's hard to explain, but whatever. I think that's it for me, right? Yeah. We're about 40 minutes, so I shortened it up a little bit. I know these episodes have been getting longer. I said people don't mind. I'm sure they do mind because people have limited time to sit and watch videos or whatever. But it's a podcast, so you can put the audio into your earbuds and listen while you're cutting the lawn or do whatever. All right, that's it for me, and that's it for Joe Biden. Have a great weekend. Don't forget to engage the channel, like, subscribe, leave a comment, me thumbs up. Please engage the channel, I should say. Remember, you're under attack psychologically, biologically. Join me every day, Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. live on Rumble. Stay hip to the trick. Respect.
Google me, bitch. Google me, bitch. Google me, bitch. Google me.
You can't handle the truth.
You're the big man, I think. You're the big man, I think. You're the big man, I think. You're the big man, I think.
The new world order